the landscape in the Atlantic Division changed drastically over the offseason, which is it's not something we'd seen in a while for since that first year that the Leafs cracked into the playoffs with this Matthews Marner core. It started to become pretty evident who the big dogs were. It's Tampa, Boston, and Toronto, and then Florida charged up the standings the past couple seasons. But this year, we finally are seeing steps forward from Ottawa and Detroit. Neither team has made the playoffs in a while. They were going through these 4 to 6 year rebuilds. They were actively trying to tank, and it should start to pay off a little bit here, but in different ways. Whereas, let's start with the Senators, because I think we'll group these two teams together. But I want to start with Ottawa because I think they are the team that is getting the who's going to be the most interesting team? Who's the team you have your eye on the most to start the season? In the media, especially the Canadian media, they're going to say Ottawa. They'll say Toronto too because of just the nature of them. But everyone's talking about Ottawa. I thought we would be able to maybe sneak bigger prices on Ottawa, but it was pretty clear even before they made the moves for Claude Giroux, Alex DeBrincat. The market was kind of onto them, and they shortened pretty quickly to a range that I wouldn't play as on a team level. We'll talk about a different way to play them, but as a group, there's some fatal flaws here. The defense is thin. They can score. They probably can outscore some defensive problems. They should stick around the playoff mix longer than they have in the years past because of their dynamic offense. But the defense is thin. I like Anton Forsberg as a goalie. I think Cam Talbot's a suitable, 1B backup guy, but that's not a tandem that you're going to sleep at night feeling good. Like, all right, I got to bet on the Senators, and I feel in safe hands with Forsberg and Talbot. So, this is the way of saying, like, I think that the Senators are going to end up better than they were last year, but they're not going to match the hype.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think matching the hype is going to be tough. I know we both have a couple plays on the Senators we like, but yeah, some of the main areas like the team total over and to make playoffs, I think are fairly weak bets that might actually be somewhat common amongst the public right now with the perception of this team. So yeah, I think there are still just enough question marks that for me, I'm not overly sold on them as a unit.
And that being said, the way that we both like to invest in Ottawa in case that, this thing just clicks and they do take that leap forward is is backing DJ Smith, the head coach, to win the Jack Adams Award. You can find him 50-1 out there. And it's just correlated to their playoff odds. If they're just north of 200 to plus 200 to win, to make the playoffs. If they get into the postseason, DJ Smith, he will be the favorite to win Coach of the Year, barring something, crazy from somewhere else. So if you are someone who's buying into the hype of Ottawa, and even if you're not, and you're just like, you know what, just in case the hype is real, it does kind of behoove you just to put that ticket in your pocket.
Yeah, I completely agree. And then the other one I'll put in, so you talked about how the defense is really thin. So Jake Sanderson's going to be a really important rookie for them coming in. He should garner a top 4 minutes, could arguably be their second best defenseman. And if they're going to take a step forward, I think it's going to be behind what'll be a huge season from him. So I think at plus 2,500 to win Rookie of the Year, the Calder Trophy, you could do a lot worse than that. I think that's a pretty strong play as well.
It's fun. This is why season previews, especially when you're looking at it from a betting lens, is so much fun, because I think both of you and I are saying we're against the Senators going into the season, but two of our favorite bets on the whole board are pro Senators bets because they're correlated with something else. And it's just, God, I love betting.
For sure. And like, that's the whole nature of handicapping, right? Yeah. Like, we're not saying they're locked to miss. I just think there's less of the time that they're going to be super good than maybe some people think.
Yep, and there's a way to hedge against it, and that's, Sanderson called their trophy ticket, or DJ Smith to win the Jack Adams. The other coach that we really like in this market is Derek Lalonde, and like I said, we'll group the Senators and Red Wings together because I think that the narrative is very similar. They're in the same division. The odds are pretty similar. The Red Wings brought in David Perron. They brought in Andrew Kopp, Oli Mata, Ben Sherratt on the blue line to help solidify that core. They're building that blue line around Mo Seider. They're building their top six forwards around Dylan Larkin, Lucas Raymond, and Tyler Bertuzzi. And they just got better like Kopp and Perron are great supporting cast members. Kopp is very versatile. Perron, you can basically pencil him in for 25 goals and a net positive basically every time he steps on the ice. You know, the jury's out on Sherratt, the jury's out on Oli Mata, but they do provide upgrades to what the Red Wings were rolling out there in terms of their defense last year. And then they signed Ville Husso as a goaltender who, and kind of like Tristan Jarry, like he had a very bad year, and then he followed it up with a terrific one last season for the Blues. He comes over to tandem with Alex Nedeljkovic, who was the opposite. He had a great year with Carolina, was a Calder Trophy nominee, and then was bad on a Red Wings team that was just a defensive sieve. So how much can you read into it? I don't know. But that tandem has some upside. I think, pretty high upside. So I would say I'm more bullish on Detroit's season-long outlook than I am on the Senators, which I think is against what the market's suggesting. But I think that has a lot to do with how the hype has been covered with these two teams a little bit. The Red Wings have been like simmering while the Senators are boiling. But once again, favorite bet on the board is Derek Lalonde. He's a rookie head coach. If he brings a team like the Red Wings back to the playoffs after missing for, I think, 6 years in a row, he'll be the favorite to win the award. And they're around 3-1 to make it. So instead of betting the 3-1 on Detroit to make the playoffs, if you are interested in that, just take Lalonde at a much, much bigger number to win Coach of the Year.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. Love the Lalonde play. I think the downside of this defense could be worse than people are thinking because, those two veterans they brought in have been getting just worked over at 5-on-5 of late. So I think that's a pretty big concern where when you really dive into it, they might not upgrade the defense core very much. And I think that's a big concern. But with that said, the goaltending tandem has the upside of it's right up there with any of the teams in the East. And then the offensive core, I like a lot of what they're building.
It's a really interesting top nine. Like even like the Dominic Kubalik signing, like these are capable NHL players rather than lottery tickets that you see teams in like rebuilding years do. Like for example, like the first one that comes to my mind is like Andreas Athanasiou. Like, yeah, he might be a 25 goal scorer, but he's going to do that for you on a veteran minimum contract and then walk elsewhere. That's how rebuilding an NHL goes. Let's stay here. We've been in agreement a lot here, and this one will be a little more just divisive. The Toronto Maple Leafs are, depending on where you look, they're the second favorite to win the Stanley Cup. 10-1 at FanDuel with Carolina as the joint second favorite behind Colorado. I think that's pricing them at their ceiling because of they're just too thin around the edges because of the way they've structured their roster. And I think the goaltending, it might work out. Samsonov has a great pedigree. We've seen Matt Murray have great seasons, but both of them are coming off back-to-back, and in Murray's case, back-to-back poor seasons. So, and he's got the injury issues, of course. Samsonov has the off-ice stuff. There's a number of ways this goes. And while I agree that this is still a really good team with two of the best players in the world, and then a supporting cast of 3 or 4 other players that are really strong, it's the floor that scares me of investing a team that's going to be priced at 10-1 the Stanley Cup. So I think an under is fine because the division is going to be a lot tighter. Like I said, like last year, the playoff race was settled. Like there was no pressure on this team at all to collect points down the stretch. So they could kind of coast it into the playoffs. I think you can basically subtract like 8 points from every team that made the playoffs in the Atlantic in a weird way, because those will just naturally get distributed to Buffalo, Detroit, and Ottawa, who will step forward. Montreal should step forward. That puts Toronto at 107. That's right around where their season point total is. So I'm not saying that I like, a bet to miss the playoffs, but I think if you're going to bet them, if I was going to bet them, it would be on the under.
Yeah, I think we both know this is the one we're kind of the most divided on. And to your credit, like I think I'm probably the only respected analyst I've seen trying to defend this team over the summer. But I just think that their high-end guys put their ceiling so far above some of these guys. Like when I totally see why they're the second Cup favorite or tied for it at a lot of books, because I just love what they have in Matthews, Marner, and Nylander so much. And then I actually just I think the peripheral players are a lot better than people think. Like Rasmus Sandin's a guy that I love. I'm really high on him. Getting him signed now could be really good. he wants to sign there now for that ticket that he just did because he thinks he's going to go out and dominate, which is actually, I think, really reasonable. I really like the guy. So I think there is enough upside that you can buy into. I think they are a very warranted cup favorite. I know that's not a common take. And then the other thing, Matt Murray, I think, had a better season last year, and this is what the Leafs are hanging their hat on. Then people thought he got left out to dry a lot behind what was a terrible Senators team. And then same thing with Samsonov. I think he has a lot more upside when he's dialed in than people think. He's obviously had his off ice flaws, but the talent's there. He's a star when he's on. And even with the Capitals, they went 23, 12, and 7 with him in the net. And that team, that Caps team, fought through a lot last year. And I, like, as a Caps fan, I'm not going to try to say they have the upside of the Leafs. So personally, like, through all the hate and all the people who think they're kind of overvalued, I think they're going to come into the season and be really good. Like, I'm willing to put that out there, that I think more often than not, this is just going to be a really good hockey team that ends up rightfully entering the playoffs as one of the cup favorites. There might be some struggles, and obviously with their media and the way that team gets covered, they are going to get blown out of proportion. But I just feel pretty confident that when we get to the postseason, they're going to be one of the teams entering with a realistic upside to win it all.
The Leafs, kind of like the Rangers a little bit, they didn't really deal with much in terms of like COVID issues last year. Their main guys were healthy for most of the season as well. I do wonder like how this team copes if we see an injury cluster like we are right now for them in the training camp, because I like players like Nicholas Aube-Kubel and Eric Kel Youngkrook and Alex Kerfoot. Those guys, yeah, they're good middle six players, but because of the way they're covered, like, everyone is the solution to the Leafs problems. Zach Aston-Reese is a perfect fit for the fourth line, or Nicholas Aube-Kubel is going to be a fan favorite. Like, that's how they're covered. So I think that those guys often get, blown out of proportion a little bit. Like, if Zach Aston-Reese was on the Carolina Hurricanes, would be like, yeah, this is, suitable fourth line player, but because he's on the Leafs on a PTO, like, he becomes, some defensive wizard, and he's a good defensive player, but he's not really going to contribute much offensively. I mean, I think that this is a team that, like you said, going to be good, but I just don't think that they should be priced the way they are, which is the second favorite until that goaltending tandem proves it to me. That the main concern with Murray, of course, is health more than anything, and they're going to be asking a lot of him. If he's on that contract, and they presume he's going to be the starter. I think you and I are kind of in agreement that Samsonov will likely play more, just with the way this NHL seasons go on. But they'll suck up a ton of airtime, especially in the beginning of the season. The Leafs will. Let's talk about the team that bounced them in the first round last year. That's Tampa Bay Lightning. In a weird way, Tampa Bay is underrated this season. I don't know how that's happened. They've won 2 cups in a row. Then they made it to the Stanley Cup final last year and lost to a generational team in the Avalanche. They're 12-1 to win the Stanley Cup. And I think people just have Lightning fatigue a little bit. So they're not going to be, the favorite. They had a couple of guys that needed to leave town because of contract or salary cap issues in Andre Palat and Ryan McDonough. Those are important players. They're not irreplaceable. And the core is still there, right? You got Braden Point, should be healthy. Steven Stamkos, he might be the most underrated player in the league, which is crazy to say too. 106 points last year for Stamkos in a healthy season. Kucherov, Hedman, Sergachev, Chernak, and then of course the goaltender, Andrei Vasilevsky, and the coach, John Cooper. The Lightning, to me, if I was going to pick a team under, in the top 5 that I wanted to bet a Stanley Cup future on, it would be Tampa Bay. I would never bet a favorite in an awards market, but I don't hate John Cooper at 10-1 to win Coach of the Year, because there's a narrative going around. He's never won it before. So if he gets this team, everyone's expecting them, is it over? Is the window shut? And then if he gets them to win the division or to get into the playoffs, everyone's going to make him the Coach of the Year if we don't see a crazy, surprise team make the playoffs or whatever. So that's how I would look at the Lightning. I'll sit back and wait, because you could see them pace themselves. You might be able to catch a higher number later on in the year. So Tampa Bay is a team that I still believe in, but just I'm not betting on.
Yeah, I think you hit it all perfectly there. They're still going to be really good. Barring serious injury, I don't really see how they're not safely coasting into the playoffs, especially Vasilevsky. We talked about how many goalies do we know for sure are going to be a rock. he's going to be a rock. If he's moderately healthy, he's going to play good. I think we can pretty much lock that in, and that's a pretty short list for teams like that. And yeah, one thing we've seen it the last 2 seasons, they've had some pretty serious stretches middle of the year where they weren't playing very good hockey. I think that's pretty possible this year that they kind of follow that road. And one thing I think is worth commenting on in their division, I think Toronto would love to maybe win the division as much as possible because they hate that first round narrative, and getting a soft matchup compared to what they got last year when I thought they actually played excellent hockey, being Tampa, I think is huge for them. So I really like Tampa, but they're a team that to win the division, I still don't think is a super strong bet, even considering that I think Florida are probably overvalued.
Yeah, the Lightning are weird because I think this 12-1 number is just going to hang around all season because, like you said, they're going to do their normal thing, which is they'll pace themselves. We'll talk in February, like, oh, do we believe that the Lightning are actually, are they done? Are they fatigued? Have they played so much hockey over the past few seasons? And then the week before the season ends, they'll snap it into gear and they'll look really good in the playoffs. So yeah, you can kind of just pump the brakes on investing in Tampa right now, but I think their team just have circled in the back of your mind before as the season goes on. Let's talk about the Panthers now. You and I both think they're overvalued. So tell them why.
So the main concern with Florida for me and for everyone that's pumping this narrative is the defense core, which is just, it's really shallow now for a team that's supposed to be one of the very best and a preseason cup favorite. They lost Mackenzie Weegar, who was unreal for them last season. Is their number 2 defenseman, and he was stellar on a team which already defending was their clear flaw. And that loss, I think, just could be massive. And I think they're undervaluing that. And then they also lost Jonathan Huberdeau, but obviously that's going to be counteracted as they brought in Matthew Tkachuk. So that's not really my point of contention with this team. And then the goaltending duo, I'm a little higher on Spencer Knight than some people entering this season. And obviously, I think they locked him up to that deal this summer with the plans of playing him a lot more and trying to keep the value down when he plays and possibly does well. But Sergei Bobrovsky, I think counting on him to do what he did last year is a bit of a stretch. I think it's pretty realistic that he could take a step back from what we've seen. And I think, yeah, if the defense core takes a step back, Bobrovsky takes a step back, this team's probably not going to score like they did last season, all 82 games in what was a historic output. So I think, yeah, there's some realistic flaws that could be exposed for sure.
The Spencer Knight point is one I want to expand on. I think he's worth a flyer in the Vezina market. He's 175-1, as high as that out there. And that's an absurd number because that contract that he just signed, like you said, it does kind of tip their hand. Like, this is our guy, even though Bobrovsky's on a $10 million a year deal. And if the Panthers are good, I think both of us, the floor is much lower. So 6-1 to miss the playoffs is fine. But I mean, most likely they're a good team again. I think we both can agree to that. Like, the talent is there. Their forward depth is good. The defense core could just be a disaster. But if they are good, again, they come close to 100 points. That probably means that Spencer Knight has a great season, and he won't be 175-1 as the season goes on. So I like Spencer Knight to win the Vezina as my favorite Florida Panthers bet. And like I said, triple digits out there. I think anything above 75-1 is great. So 175-1 is really good. One of the perennial favorites in this division is the Boston Bruins, but this season the market's kind of soured on them, and there's legitimate reasons for it to do that. Charlie McAvoy is hurt. Brad Marchand's hurt. They probably won't be back until American Thanksgiving at the earliest. Matt Grzelcyk is hurt. His timeline might be a little sooner than those two. Right away, that's your best winger, your best defenseman, and maybe your most important player in McAvoy and his partner, Matt Grzelcyk. So the Bruins have drifted. They're like 25-1. They're behind Florida, Toronto, and Tampa Bay to win the division. This is usually a team that is either the favorite or a co-favorite in the Atlantic. New coach, Jim Montgomery. Goaltending tandem now in its second full season with Tuukka Rask retired. David Krejci's back. Patrice Bergeron came back for another season. So they largely kept the band back together, but the band is really good. And when Marchand and McAvoy come back, like, this could be an elite team. The question is whether they've fallen too far adrift by that time that happens. I don't think that's the case. I actually think the Bruins are a team I really like. You could probably, this is being a little risky because just in case they do storm out of the gates, but I think you can wait, see if the Bruins start slow, and then buy a really big number for relative to what this team usually is priced at, like 35-1 on them to win the Stanley Cup. If you're kind of seeing them, just treading water, waiting for Marchand and McAvoy, and then when the cavalry returns, you could be paid off. So that's my favorite strategy with the Bruins is I believe in them. I think they're good. I think they're vastly underrated relative to the market. And you look at this division, but I'm going to sit back. I'm going to wait. I like Swayman also as a Vezina outsider because of the way that the defense plays in front of him. I think I'm really high on him as a goalie. So a Swayman bet. And then other than that, just can kind of sit back and watch the Bruins. But I think you're pretty high in them as well.
Yeah, I like the Bruins. I think waiting is the perfect strategy because we've seen how it goes with these NHL odds. They're not going to update it too thoroughly. So I think Boston will need to really have a very strong stretch without those guys for us to really regret this strategy. But more likely, even if they tread water somewhat successfully, it's still going to be right around 25-1, I expect, by the time we're seeing Marchand and McAvoy get back in the lineup. So I think that's kind of the right way to look at it and just see how it goes for them at the start.
Yeah, and I think the Bruins are a team where if you're going to bet them, you should just bet the upside. And I really don't see too many reasons to go against them. I think that the upside is clear, and if they get into the postseason, they'll be a really tough out with the way they played. And I like Montgomery as a coach. He had his personal demons he dealt with after the Dallas situation, but that Stars team was really good defensively, and he had them playing well. So, the Bruins, I kind of like we talked about with the Capitals a little bit, the fact that the market sentiment is so against them has provided you with a pretty good opportunity here. Let's now move towards the two also rans. And I think that's actually a little harsh on them because Buffalo and Montreal should be better this season. Does that mean that they'll be knocking on the door for the playoffs? No. We saw Montreal get much better as Martin St. Louis took over. I think it was just like a breath of fresh air. I don't think that team was gelling with Dominique Ducharme very well. And everybody on that roster got better in the second half. And part of that is probably just he couldn't play much worse than they did in the first half, but they did look well. Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, like there's a young car emerging here. Number 1 overall pick from last draft, Uri Slafkovsky, if he cracks the roster. Like there's enough young pieces with upside here that I just think Montreal's going to surpass what they did last year, which is a very low bar, 55 points, finished dead last, minus 98 goal differential. But I just think that this is a team that's going to probably provide you more value than less value over an 82-game season on a game-to-game betting basis.
Yeah, I think you're perfectly on it there. I probably mainly just going to hope they don't bust our worst team futures that I'm pretty high on. But I think that there's enough upside there. And yeah, I think the main thing, it's kind of obvious to say, but it seemed like when St. Louis took over, it was just as simple as the team wanting to come play hockey again. Whereas things got so ugly in the middle of last year, just who wants to be there? Like just outside of being a professional, they're miserable. And I think St. Louis came in and was a breath of fresh air, and a lot of guys started having some fun. And hopefully that'll carry over into what is a pretty strong year. But obviously they're still going to be bottom 6 or 7, I think. Maybe a little higher than odds makers are expecting.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think they had 19 wins or 16 regulation wins, 22 wins last season, 22 out of 82. That's just really bad. They're going to clear that easily. And I think they're a team that in the beginning of the season, while everyone else is kind of sorting out whether it's like a new coach and new pieces and just getting their act together, they could be a little sneaky because they'll be big prices right out of the gate.
They already are. The price versus Toronto on opening or second night of the year is, as someone who loves Toronto, I already was thinking that game could very realistically be played a lot closer than that price suggests. So yeah, I think that is definitely a point to watch.
The last team we'll talk about on this, our first part of our 2-part NHL betting mega preview, are the Buffalo Sabres. And a reminder, you can listen to our Western Conference preview on Line Change, our NHL betting podcast feed, where you'll hear Nick and I break down the 16 teams out west. The Sabres, for I would say the last few seasons before the pandemic, they had this like weird kind of aura about them where almost like the Senators this season, everyone was just expecting that this is the season. And they, even though they were still long odds going into every year, they were overrated. Like they were a 50-1 team that was way overrated. And this season, I feel like people have kind of learned their lesson with Buffalo. So they look appropriately priced. But this is a team, much like the Ottawa Senators. Ottawa Senators the past 2 seasons were the team that punched up best as a big underdog. Like they'd pay off the most at 175 or longer. The Sabres I have circled to kind of fill that role this season. This is a team that is all pulling in the right direction for the first time going into a year. The Jack Eichel situation got sorted. They have a young core they're building around. The direction's there. The goaltending is a concern. The depth is a concern. The defense is a concern. But with guys like Alex Tuck and Jeff Skinner, Tage Thompson, bringing along Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn, JJ Peterka, Power, Dahlin, like there's a team that when they show up and they play teams like Florida, Toronto, Tampa, like they're going to give them a game. So I think the Sabres, there's one other team we'll talk about in the Western Conference that will challenge them for this title, but I think the Sabres will probably be the team I have the most individual game-by-game bets on as the season goes on.
Yeah, I like the Sabres. I like a lot of the young pieces and what they've got working for them. And to touch on our bet on worst regular season record again, there's a couple teams we're liking there. The odds makers are putting, say, like Buffalo with a realistic chance of being in that race. And the fact that I like what's going on with them is one of the reasons that I think the teams, the Flyers and the Hawks that we do like to finish last in that race, have some good upside. The prices are longer on those two because of teams like the Sabres that are priced to be in that mix, but I think they won't be with the young talents at hand and all pulling in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm going to lose a lot of money on this team.